Imagine you've just powered on your computer after years of living inside the familiar world of Windows. The Start menu etched into your muscle memory. The rhythm of updates and reboots, a routine you barely question anymore. But something feels different now because you've decided it's time for a change, a shift towards something faster. Lighter, more private, and more in your control, and that curiosity has led you to the vast universe of Linux, where one question keeps popping up in forums, YouTube comments, and late-night searches. If you're coming from Windows, should you choose Zorin OS or Ubuntu? And that's exactly where our story begins. Not with technical jargon or intimidating command lines, but with a simple scenario. You, sitting at your desk, wondering which of these two giants will feel like home the moment you click that install button. The first thing you notice when exploring Zorin OS is that it seems to understand your hesitation, almost like it was built with a quiet empathy for people who aren't trying to become Linux experts overnight, but just want their computer to work without friction, and the interface greets you with a layout that feels uncannily familiar. A taskbar where you expect it, an application menu that doesn't require relearning how to navigate your digital life. And this sense of continuity matters more than most people realize because switching operating systems isn't just a technical shift. It's a psychological one, and Zorin OS leans heavily into reducing that mental gap, offering themes that mimic the look and feel of Windows so closely that the transition can feel less like a leap and more like a gentle step across a small bridge. Ubuntu, on the other hand, takes a slightly different approach, almost as if it's saying, "Welcome to something new, but don't worry. You'll get comfortable quickly." And its default desktop environment greets you with a clean, modern aesthetic that doesn't try to replicate Windows but instead introduces its own identity. A dock on the side, an activities overview, and a workflow that prioritizes simplicity once you get the hang of it. And this difference in philosophy sets the tone for the entire comparison because while Zorin OS focuses on familiarity first and exploration second, Ubuntu invites you to adapt and discover, promising that the learning curve is shorter than you might fear. As you continue imagining this transition, performance becomes the next big question. Because one of the main reasons people consider leaving Windows behind is the desire for a system that feels snappier, especially on older hardware, and this is where both distributions shine in slightly different ways. With Zorin OS offering additions specifically tuned for low-end machines, breathing new life into laptops that Windows struggles to keep responsive, while Ubuntu balances performance with a polished experience that remains smooth on most modern systems. And the real takeaway here is that neither feels bloated in the way many Windows users are used to. The background process is lighter, the system resources treated with more respect, and that alone can make the first week feel like a revelation. Software availability is often the moment of truth for any Windows convert because no matter how beautiful an operating system looks, it has to support the tools you rely on every day, and this is where Ubuntu's massive ecosystem becomes impossible to ignore. Its software repositories vast and well-maintained, its compatibility layers and package formats ensuring that whether you're looking for productivity tools, creative applications, or development environments, you'll rarely feel stuck searching for alternatives. And Zorin OS benefits from this same ecosystem because it's built on the same foundation, meaning the apps you can run on Ubuntu are almost always just as accessible on Zorin. But what sets Zorin apart is the way it presents these options, guiding users toward familiar software equivalents and making the discovery process feel less like a scavenger hunt and more like a curated experience. Then there's the topic that often sparks the most curiosity, running Windows applications, because even the most enthusiastic switchers usually have at least one program they're not ready to give up. And Zorin OS leans into this reality by integrating compatibility tools in a way that feels seamless, almost like a safety net reassuring you that your transition doesn't have to be all or nothing. While Ubuntu offers similar possibilities through additional setup and community guides, proving that both systems can bridge the gap. But Zorin's out-of-the-box convenience can feel especially comforting for newcomers who don't want to spend their first weekend troubleshooting. Customization is another area where the personality of each distro starts to shine. And it's here that the Linux philosophy truly reveals itself because you're no longer confined to a single vision of how your desktop should look or behave, with Ubuntu offering a solid, cohesive default that can be tweaked extensively if you choose to explore deeper. While Zorin OS provides curated layout options that let you reshape the interface in seconds, switching between styles that mimic different operating systems or entirely unique looks. And this flexibility isn't just about aesthetics, it's about giving you control over how you interact with your computer. something many Windows users don't fully realize they've been missing until they experience it firsthand. Security and privacy naturally enter the conversation as well, and this is often one of the quiet motivations behind the switch to Linux. The desire for a system that feels less intrusive, less cluttered with background telemetry, and more transparent in how it operates. And both Zorin OS and Ubuntu inherit the strong security model of the Linux kernel, benefiting from frequent updates, robust permission systems, and the community-driven approach to vulnerabilities. And while neither requires you to become a security expert, they both offer the reassurance that your system isn't quietly collecting data in the background, which can feel like a breath of fresh air after years of opaque update notes and hidden processes. Community support is another pillar that shapes the experience in ways new users might not anticipate, because when you run into a problem, the availability of guides, forums, and tutorials can make the difference between frustration and empowerment. And Ubuntu's massive global community means answers are often just a quick search away. Tutorials plentiful and troubleshooting steps well documented, while Zorin OS, though smaller, benefits from that same Ubuntu foundation, meaning most solutions translate easily, and its own community adds a layer of newcomer-friendly guidance that can make the first few weeks feel less intimidating. As days turn into weeks in this imagined journey, the subtle differences begin to matter more. The way updates are delivered, the polish of system tools, the default apps chosen for everyday tasks. And Ubuntu's long history shows in its maturity, the experience refined through years of iteration. While Zorin OS feels like a carefully tailored suit designed specifically for a certain audience, prioritizing comfort and approachability over showcasing the breadth of Linux possibilities right away. And neither approach is inherently better. They simply cater to different mindsets, one inviting exploration from the start, the other easing you into it. Productivity workflows also evolved during the transition, and many Windows users discover that Linux encourages slightly different habits. Virtual desktops becoming more natural, software installation feeling more centralized, updates less disruptive. And both Zorin OS and Ubuntu support these shifts beautifully, offering smooth multitasking and efficient resource management. And as you settle into this new environment, the initial question of which distro is better starts to feel less important than which one aligns more closely with how you like to work. Because the real victory is realizing that you're no longer fighting your operating system, but collaborating with it. Gaming, once considered a major barrier to leaving Windows, has become a surprisingly positive part of the story, with compatibility layers and growing native support, making it possible to enjoy a large portion of modern titles. And both Zorin OS and Ubuntu benefit equally from these advancements. The experience depending more on your hardware and setup than the distro itself. And while hardcore gamers may still keep a dual boot setup, many casual players find the transition smoother than expected, another reminder of how far the Linux ecosystem has come. Hardware compatibility is often the practical concern that determines whether the switch feels seamless or complicated, and Ubuntu's widespread adoption means manufacturers and developers frequently test against it, resulting in excellent support for a wide range of devices, from laptops to peripherals. While Zorin OS inherits much of this compatibility but adds its own layer of optimization aimed at delivering a smooth out-of-the-box experience, and in most everyday scenarios both handle Wi-Fi, graphics, and common accessories with minimal effort, reinforcing the sense that Linux is no longer just for enthusiasts willing to tinker endlessly. Over time, the emotional aspect of the transition becomes just as important as the technical one, because switching operating systems is partly about identity, about how you see your relationship with technology. And Zorin OS often feels like a reassuring companion for those who want the benefits of Linux without abandoning the familiarity of Windows overnight, while Ubuntu feels like an invitation to step into a broader ecosystem, encouraging curiosity and experimentation. And understanding this emotional dimension helps explain why debates between the two can become surprisingly passionate. They're not just about features, they're about philosophy. As you imagine reaching the 1-month mark in this journey, the differences that once seemed critical start blending into the background of daily use, and what remains is the overall feeling of the system, the sense of speed when launching apps, the quiet confidence in updates that don't derail your workflow, the satisfaction of customizing your environment to fit your habits. And both Zorin OS and Ubuntu deliver these moments consistently, proving that the real transformation isn't just switching distributions, but rediscovering what a personal computer can feel like when it's truly personal again. And so the showdown between Zorin OS and Ubuntu ultimately becomes less about declaring a winner and more about recognizing two distinct paths toward the same destination. One prioritizing immediate comfort, the other encouraging gradual discovery. And for Windows converts, the choice often comes down to whether you want your first step into Linux to feel almost indistinguishable from what you already know, or whether you're ready to embrace a slightly different workflow from day one, knowing that the rewards in performance, control, and flexibility await either way. And perhaps the most empowering realization of all is that choosing one doesn't lock you out of the other, because in the Linux world, exploration is always just a reboot away, and that freedom, the freedom to choose, to customize, to experiment, is the true story behind this ultimate distro showdown. A story not about which operating system is objectively superior, but about which one helps you feel most at home as you step into a new chapter of your computing life, discovering along the way that the journey itself is what makes the switch worthwhile. And by the time you've settled into your chosen environment, the idea of going back might feel less like returning to familiarity and more like leaving behind a newfound sense of control you didn't realize you were missing.